Message?
What message?
Yes, good evening. Welcome to Kumbukeni, and thank you for joining us. This week, the podcast has taken a very solemn tone. For one, a member of the larger African family lost his life, unfortunately, on the streets of Memphis, Tennessee. Uh, the brother's name is Tyre Nichols. Tyre Nichols was doing what some of us will do, you know, just by the norm of the the activity itself, driving to Starbucks. Whoever thinks of driving to Starbucks thinking that will be the last drive they will do, wherein he was waylaid by people who actually look like him. That was the shocking death. But enough about them. Um, Tyre Nichols will be centered in the sense that we have to honor his passing, and in so doing, we plead that his family find the fortitude to bear the irreparable loss to their family and to the extended community. Before I go further, I would like to introduce my co-hosts, Milton Alimadi and Unduku, and ask them to say some words with regards to our young ancestor, Tyrone Nichols. Brother Milton.
Yes, greetings, sisters and brothers. Welcome to today's episode. As Brother Adesoji has already indicated, we have a rather somber tone today. Reflection, our prayer and thoughts to the young man, Tyre Nichols, brutally murdered by 5 fellow African police officers. And that's the sad part of it, of course. Not that it's any less painful when the assassins are European American officers. But we have to, in my case at least, I don't think these African, whether you call them African or African descendant or African Americans, they're all Africans essentially, would brutalize a European American the way they beat this young brother. And that's the sad fact. They would not dare to cross their mind to beat a European to pulp like that. And obviously, we're not saying they should beat a European American, but we bring this contradiction to highlight the fact that many of us as African people really have a special internalized hatred for fellow Africans. And that's one of the issues that we want to touch on today, its origins, its various manifestations, and the reason how and why it holds us back from realizing our essence as human beings.
Hello, everyone. Nduku with you all. This is going to be a tough session to go through today. I mean, usually our topics are tough to go through anyway. We're talking about the plight of Black people in general. And the fact that we are still under oppression does not help. But I want to start by honoring our brother, Tyre Nichols. May he have a peaceful transition as he joins the ancestors. And to his family, may you find comfort in the good times and the memories that you built with him, and in knowing that his spirit and his name will live on, because we will mention him, we will continue to remember him. But also to say that why is Kumbukeni a podcast that has been talking about Africa, talking about something that happened in the United States? We are a Pan-African podcast. The three of us are all Pan-African. And therefore, anything that relates to any Black person in the globe, on Earth, is important to us. And I and fellow community members have recently started practicing Kwanzaa principles daily. And this reminds me of Ujima. And Ujima says to us that my brothers and sisters' problems are my problems. And we need to come together as a community to solve them. And so our conversation today will touch on what happened, why it happened, and how we as a community can come together to solve them. Thank you, Adesoji.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you. Well, speaking to the problems of policing in the United States, I don't live there. So I would rightly defer to you guys as to, if you can recount what it is to live in quote unquote a garrisoned state, police state, as it were. Because a couple of times I've been there, in comparison to where
The
I live,
oversaturation.
Right.
it's not just the oversaturation, it's the military stance of someone who is supposed to be looking out for what's the word? The community.
Wellness.
Yeah. So could you,
Well,
starting with Brother Milton, could you
sure.
speak to the idea of what it is, the essence of policing in the United States?
Okay. I think the essence of policing in the United States is not too different from the essence of policing in other capitalist societies.
True.
The US just happens to be everything else, every aspect of capitalism happens to be on steroids in the United States. The policing here, I think the best way to understand it is to understand the class, the essential class elements of the policing. The policing in the United States is an abdication of the system delivering to the vast majority, particularly those in the marginalized communities, the low income communities, the struggling communities, so that you suffer the consequences of marginalization. And of course, you notice if you do police commissioners or even mayors, they always like to come up with statistics, crime statistics. And they say, oh, things are getting better when the incidents of assaults, the incidents of theft, the incidents of murder, burglary, all these stats are going down. But you never see them at the same time evoking the poverty levels, the unemployment levels. So there's this association, as if there's no correlation between these elements, as if somebody who has a normal, decent job, can feed his family, wakes up one day and thinks, today my criminal element is raging up, so let me act it out, you see? And that's the fallacy. So we should never see policing as designed in these societies as to keep the peace or law and order. The policing is an abdication, and the other aspect of it, of course, is the prison system, you see? So it's a criminal industrial complex. You have the prison systems and the judges, the whole judicial system is a part of that, and the policing is the strong arm part of that. And then occasionally it goes, we have incidents such as the murder of Tyre Nichols, but there's a whole stream of incidents that we can look back. And of course, since the policing is on overdrive in the marginalized communities, most of these incidents also occur in the marginalized communities. We can't just say we're there to stop the crime, because where do some of the biggest crimes occur? On Wall Street. The financial collapse in the United States, 2008, where was that originated from? Did you ever see police going there to lead people out in handcuffs, because of those crimes? Of course not. Instead, they're in the marginalized communities picking up or exterminating young sisters and brothers, in this case, Tyre Nichols. So that would be my observation in terms of the purpose of policing.
So you're saying police in the United States is a deflection tactic, which is look over there while they carry on their nefarious activities in one corner.
Absolutely, and keep the barbarians on the other side of the game.
I suppose the same question would go to you, Sister Nduku. What would you consider to be policing, the act of policing?
It's funny. I'm just going to speak to that word that our brother Milton used, barbarians, and in his book Manufacturing Hate, which our brother Adesoji will show in a bit because he'll speak to it some more. He says that there are stereotypes that the Western media has put attention on about Black people, and one of them is that the Black inhabitants of the African continent, but in general, are barbaric and primitive. So when you have that continuous messaging of, and I will speak to my experience on with the police in the US, but I wanted to point this out. When you have that constant rewind messaging and people are listening, Black people are barbaric, it is only logical that you will start embracing, unless you're actively watching what your mindset, you will start embracing those thoughts.
Correct.
And I believe this is what's happening with these officers. Yes, they look Black on the outside, but they're walking around with white supremacist souls. Walking around maintaining a system that is oppressing their own people and not finding anything wrong with it. In fact, standing proudly as I call them, gatekeepers of the system. And so for me, my experience with police reminds me, yesterday I was driving in the city, and you're looking for parking spots in the city, and I finally saw one, and I stopped so that I could pull into the spot. And behind me was a Black vehicle that I recognized, but I didn't recognize until it turned on its siren. And listen, I have no time for, so why are you turning on your siren? I'm backing up into the spot. And it's that unnecessary need to assert power, like your bloated need to assert power. Like, why do you need to tell me that you're an officer behind me? And no, sir, ma'am, I'm parking, wait there like every other citizen. So for me, and the day this happened, I remember I was in the office and one of the screens was on, and I saw it and I said, no, it did not happen. That was my first reaction. No, I'm not looking at this. No, it didn't happen. And I heard a colleague of mine undermine it, the fact that there were protests, making, again, those microaggressions that we go through at work. Why are they protesting? Oh, so all of us have to get up in arms about this? So this is the mentality that is the United States of America, the undervaluing of Black bodies, not seeing us as human. I bet you right now, if a video like this is posted in the United States about a white person, they will find reason as to why America should be up in arms about it. But yes, so that evening, what I did, I called my son, and I was literally speaking to my son, telling him to be careful when he's out there because of this. So that is the experience of being in the United States and living under the policing of the United States. police forces?
I mean, to speak to what you both have spoken so eloquently to, would take us to Frantz Fanon in his great book, Black Skin, White Mask, where he says a man who possesses a language possesses as an indirect consequences what that world expresses and is implied by that language. So by that very token, so we're saying this gentleman, I'm using gentleman loosely.
There's nothing gentle. I have said that before, brother, about them.
This airing, these police officers, basically by the very token of putting on that uniform, embracing their badge, have invariably accepted the idea that they are going to do what everybody else has previously done in that uniform and what that uniform denotes. So it begs the question then that is what is happening in the United States, is it just unique to the United States in terms of policing? Brother Milton.
Oh, no. I would like to also tie that question that you pose with what Sister Nduku said, the devaluation of Black bodies, of Black lives. It not only affects Europeans or European Americans, but it affects the people that are also being devalued and demonized. So often we become our own worst enemy, and we want to prove to the establishment that we are part of the system. Yes, we accept the notion that the barbarians need to be kept on the other side of the gate. So I'm a part of you, even though I may look physically like those same barbarians. I'm actually part of the enforcement force, and I'm not going to withhold back my allegiance. My allegiance is to the system. So don't ever second guess me or second doubt me. That even if you are not around in my presence, I will enforce the system, our rule, our function of keeping the barbarians down. And then when you combine that by the fact that many of us, due to succumbing to centuries and one generation after the other of demonization and its impact on us, so many of us actually do believe that people that look like us are less than human beings. And of course, with the standards of measuring who qualifies as a full human being, being a European, or the standards of Europeanness, you see? So now you have the ridiculous reality that even in our own African communities, the more one appears more, quote unquote, European or Europeanized, the more humanity is bestowed upon that individual. And that's why we also have the issue of colorism. We can't dodge these issues, so that somebody who is less pigmented as an African is somehow seen to have much more positive attributes. And then it goes even further. If we look at the European historical writing of African peoples, Africans that have the thin noses, the thin lips, high cheekbones, are regarded as Europeanized Africans. And if you read the literature, in fact, and there's a chapter in my book where I discuss that, where the Maasai, the Wakavirondo, the Tutsi were regarded by Europeans as less Negroid and closer to them, and were somehow bestowed with more positive attributes. And this is from century and from generation to generation. And I'm glad you mentioned Fanon's book, because he does a good analysis in that to the extent that he gives examples from back in the day when Africans who came to study in France would pretend that they're from the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Because by association, the Caribbean is seen as less
Imagine that.
African and less backward. And then he also gave examples of people from the Caribbean getting enraged and getting ready to fight if somebody will stick them for being an African. And this is a very serious pathology that affects our community, internalized self-hatred. And then one final comment, Malcolm X also spoke about this. I always recommend that short, there's a short clip from my longer speech, and this clip is about 6 minutes. It's on YouTube. And if you go to YouTube and you search under, you can't hate the roots of a tree without hating the tree.
Yes.
And it gives an excellent summary of how Africa was demonized during European colonial rule and how it impacts African sisters and brothers in the United States. How none of us wanted to associate with Africa because it was depicted as savages, cannibals. And then he said, unconsciously, we didn't realize that by hating Africa, we were actually hating ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, to speak to what you just said now with regards to the indoctrination of self-hatred led to the 1994 Rwanda genocide.
Yes, indeed.
Because this idea of curating hierarchy and eugenics introduced by the Belgians was what led to that very idea of seeing someone in less than and then just go on a killing spree that in 4 weeks, 800,000 people will be killed. Some even in churches. Ironically so, because who started that practice? The Catholic Church. So the notion that this thing is not about money can also be, if you look in, I think it's I'm not sure which days, I can't recollect now which days Washington Post it is. There's a breakdown of the payout of police departments across the states, of how much they pay out in terms of claims that come from abuse of power. And here's the irony. There's even a breakdown of which officer racks off more, his actions have cost the department more. And those police officers are still on those particular forces. They are still on that forces. There is one so ridiculous. I think it's in New York. He cost the entire department about 114 million.
But here's the worst thing of the points that you're making. Here's the worst part of it. All of this is factored in. So all these police departments sit with it's
part of their budget.
Exactly. They're numbers people, and they factor it in. So it's put in the budget. Just imagine that. Instead of saying we're going to have zero tolerance and eliminate this budget because we're going to ensure that the police don't abuse, don't kill people they're not supposed to be killing, don't commit these crimes. Instead of doing that, they negotiate to enhance the budget to pay out. So in fact, you're promoting these atrocities. I think if the money were to come from the paychecks of these police officers, I think that would really affect their behavior immediately.
And which brings us to the reason. What would be, I suppose I'm asking a rhetorical question here now because I think I know the answer, but still I will pose the question, which is, why would someone have that idea that someone who looks like them is less than? Where does that idea, where does that notion comes from?
I was going to point out Frantz Fanon's also. He says that men of color who nullify, he mentions men of color who nullify the liberation efforts of other men of color. And this is through colonialism. It's happening in Africa. You asked about that before. We see the beatings happening in Africa, in South Africa. You see them. I just watched a video this morning by Wode, Wode is a Ghanaian brother who's traveling throughout Africa to promote the beauty of Africa and encourage Africans to travel through Africa. And he was stuck at the border in Togo because they were not looking at him as a fellow African, as someone who come in, it's this mindset where we all see each other as inferior and therefore see ourselves as inferior. And it's been, we were taken to school, we were taught under their education system, and in that education system we were taught that they were better in many different ways. You were taught what's it called, Western literature, before you were taught your own African literature. So
William
for a child,
Shakespeare.
yes, I am surprised you said his name, but
Yes.
this is the thing. As a child, if you're being taught this is constantly, this is what, so you grow up wanting to be that, and you grow up distancing yourself from your blackness and your black culture.
Merchants of Venice.
No, as a child, no, I don't want to be associated with that thing that's looked down upon. I want to be this thing. All of us
Romeo and
want
Juliet.
to, right? And so that's what's going on. And when it comes to the police department, in these spaces, these men are in community. They're in brotherhood, because you will hear them call each other brothers, with men who have white supremacist mindset. And so they start taking on those mindsets, not to mention that the system itself of law enforcement is encouraging this mindset in the different ways that it operates in their own training. When they do their training, who are they using to show the perpetrator? Do they show white men as perpetrators when they're training their police force? So if I'm going to police academy and we see clips of the perpetrator as we train, and it's constantly a black person, whether I'm black or white, I will start associating criminal with blackness. And this is the problem.
To echo what the sister said, remember the famous Professor Kenneth Clark experiment, right? Where, literally black infants given a choice of two dolls.
Two dolls, yeah.
Would select the European doll. You see? So this is very deep-seated, and it's challenging. And of course, we have to keep, part of the mission of having a show like this is to keep working on that, to keep demystifying and debunking white supremacy. And by doing that, on the other hand, promote self-love and the love of Black. And the sister also pointed out that this is not confined to here in the United States. It's global. And she gave the example of South Africa, where we have all these incidents of South African citizens attacking Africans who come from other African countries to seek employment in South Africa. There were incidents over the last 4 or 5 years of, just a campaign brutalizing, beating, and even killing some of them. And Julius Malema spoke to this, and he raised the question. He said, why is it you're saying they're here and taking your jobs, right? First of all, these are low-paying jobs that should not even exist. They don't offer living wages, number one. So number two, why are you taking it out on them when the people who are causing these economic conditions are the same people who benefited during apartheid, the European establishment, and the new African elite that has emerged after apartheid, and they're maintaining the same system. South Africa has, in terms of wealth inequality, the worst in the world, even worse than in the United States, according to a recent study that came out either from the World Bank or IMF, one of these two institutions, but did an assessment of global inequality levels and found that South Africa even exceeded the United States, where you have multi-billionaires, you have multi-millionaires living on the one hand, on one side of the track, literally, and on the other side, you have all these marginalized Africans who have never benefited from the so-called end of apartheid, and the fact that decades after the end of apartheid, the European elite that make up less than 8% of the population still control 72% of the land, as we discussed in our previous episode. All of these have impact on people that are not able to access jobs with living wages. So Malema said it proves that there's a pathology, really, that you think it's okay for you to attack Africans coming from other African countries instead of directing your rage at those who are maintaining these horrendous unemployment levels. Unemployment of Black people in South Africa is almost 40%. Just think about that, 40% unemployment. Whereas in the white, the European, South African population, unemployment is less than 10%.
So again, the question now would be, who is projecting this image of things are somewhat okay, but in a way, the rage has been dissipated to the point where you normalize it? Because by that, I'm pointing the hands towards the media. Which brings me to the book by our co-host here, and it's been a book. It's a book that's been around for a while, but you will struggle to find it, which is another story in itself, which we will not go to today. Let's just say the idea that you would not be able to get your hands on that book was in itself crude and somewhat ugly, as we will see. The title of the book is Manufacturing Hate: How Africa Was Demonized in Western Media. And when I was reading through here, that Africa is actually a euphemism for Black people all over the world. It wasn't just Africans within the continent, it was also Africans in the United States. Because there's a part here that I won't say enrage me, but it's quite curious. If you indulge me, I shall read it. It's an epigraph anyway, from Thomas Jefferson describing Black people in the notes on the state of Virginia. He says, they secrete less by the kidneys and more by the glands of the skin, which gives them a very strong and disagreeable odor. Suffice to say, he is actually describing, he is considered a wise person, and he's describing...
That's Thomas Jefferson, right?
The same
the
Thomas
third
Jefferson.
president of these United States.
Yes. Describing his fellow citizens.
He had no problem sleeping with them.
Well,
And that's the whole
that's a
element that
whole...
we need to look into as well. Yes.
That's a whole story. So
The hypocrisy.
exactly. So the question is, if the media depicts Africa as something to be avoided, something to be distanced from, something to avoid, something to hold your nose while you walk past, it will seem the action of those police officers has somewhat taken in that very notion of what he is speaking to here, forgetting that the cradle of civilization in itself was Africa.
Yep.
So, Brother Milton, what gave you the motivation to put pen to paper with regards to the issue of Africa?
Okay, very good. I like that actually, because that allows me to reveal that it was sort of a therapeutic journey for me, to be honest with you. Even as a young person, when I was in my teens, or even before teens, I think I was maybe 11, 12. It's when I really started reading a lot of newspapers and magazines. You know, at that time, my family was in Tanzania. So my late father would send me out at around 11 p.m. every night to buy the daily news, the Tanzanian daily news, when it was coming out. So I would sit under the light from the street, the lamps, and I would read it very quickly before coming back home and handing him the first edition of the daily news. So I developed that habit of wanting to know more, and started going to the National Library, started going to what was called the United States Information Services Center, which of course is one of their covers for the spy agencies. But as an 11-year-old, you don't know, you just go there
you just embrace, yes.
to read the magazines and newspapers. And then I realized why African people or African descendants, whatever they are, always described as somehow less of human beings. The types of wordings, the type of stories, the illustrations, the imagery, everything celebrated Europeanness and denigrated anything associated with Africa. And I could detect that at that early age. So that many years later, an incident that finally convinced me that this should be a calling was when I was an undergraduate at Syracuse University. And the professor was discussing Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. And he was reading some of the most offensive passages that even as a 17 or 18-year-old would really let my skin, the hair stick up on my skin. And yet he's reading it in a very elated tone and describing that Conrad was, that book was the best book in the English language
on Africa.
And my classmates are also internalizing it the way the professor is conveying it, of course, because you have the notion that professors must know what they're talking about. I was feeling the pain, but obviously I was not equipped with the language to say, Professor, you're wrong, and this is why you're wrong. But I made it a mission that I would come back later too. So I started writing a lot of letters to the editors, always protesting about the depictions of African people or African descendants. And then one day, a friend of mine convinced me, said, why are you shouting from outside the walls? Why not become a professional journalist if that is your calling? And that's why I decided to go back to school. I went to the Columbia School of Journalism. And as part of my thesis paper, I started to focus on the historical depiction of Africans going back to the 17th century. But even before that, I looked at even the writings of people like Herodotus. I went all that way back, where you find there was all these articles examining the origins of black skin, because it was seen as something out of the normal, with whiteness being normal. So in the case of Herodotus, he said the people had black skin because the men ejected semen that was black color. So then, of course, I brought it to more recent era, where you now find that blackness and Africanness is being demonized in order to justify slavery, in order to justify colonialism and our contemporary neo-colonialism. But then, as you pointed out, it's been a challenge. First of all, publishing it as a paper, as an article, was a challenge. At Columbia University, Columbia Journalism Review invited me to submit it for publication after the paper was awarded one of those prizes at the end of the semester. And then I saw issues of the magazine coming out without my article. So finally, I called the editor. I said, what's going on? He said, there's been a decision not to publish. I said, why? He said, well, there was a vote, 2 editors supported, 2 opposed. The decisive negative vote came from the executive editor. And the thought was that these things happened a long time ago. That's okay.
Always their charge. Always their charge.
You're going to write history about demonization in media without going back a long time ago.
Yep.
But here's the kicker then. I said, okay, let me have my paper back. And then he said something very suspicious and curious. He asked me, why do you want it back? I said, what are you talking about? It is my paper. and you said you're not publishing it. That's why I want it back. He said, it's not the same as what you gave us. I said, precisely, that's why I want it back. I went to his office and I retrieved a copy of my paper, which they had now edited in preparation for publishing before they even backed off their own edited version. Now, I don't have the book in front of me, but there's a part where I describe that, where I think it's in the introduction, where they wrote on my behalf that thanking the New York Times for allowing me access to its archives, and then saying that the following excerpts from lengthy interviews. Do you have the exact section?
Yes.
Why don't you read it then? Because it's
okay. Originally, I had intended to write hold on.
I think it begins with recently the New York Times allowed me access.
Yes. I first conducted the research in 1992 for my master's thesis while I was a student at the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia University. During the course of my research, I gained access to Times archives and unearthed several racist letters that have been exchanged between former news editors and the reporters across the where is it? I know I saw it. Hold on. Let me get
it. Should be around that same section.
Yes. Bear me a second. Okay, yes.
You found it, okay.
Yes, I found it. Okay. So I found that the editors had inserted the following paragraph on my behalf, unbeknownst to me, without my consent. They went, in quotes, recently the Times granted me access to its archive, including correspondences from the 1950s, when the paper sent Bigard to Africa on a temporary assignment. After studying the archival material, I interviewed several present and former Times reporters. The following excerpt from that material and from lengthy interviews were not intended as an indictment of the Times, whose African coverage had occasionally been distinguished as being as a means of highlighting a problem in all news organizations need to address. So effectively,
these words, I never wrote one sentence of those words that you just read.
Are you sure?
Not a single word.
So if I were to read it to you, if I were to read it back to you, it won't jolt your memory to think maybe
those are their own words that they inserted in my article while they were still considering publishing it. But even after that censoring by themselves, they still shook their head and said, oh, no, this thing is still too much. Let's not publish it. So, but then I did them a favor. I sent a copy of the paper that they invited me to submit, and then they rejected. I sent it to the New York Times so that they would know what is out there. But then it's been a challenge publishing it. Ultimately, I did get a publisher for the book version now because I expanded the research. And that's how I came up with Manufacturing Hate, How Africa was Demonized in Western media. The book came out in 2020.
Yep.
The book was not able to get it reviewed by the New York Times, which is not surprising. It was been 2 years now, actually, 2021, 22, now 23, going on 3 years now, you see? In fact, when it first came out, a friend of mine who's written book reviews for the New York Times said, send it to them. They must review it because they want to address their bad history of demonization.
They want to correct their past.
Exactly. I was skeptical.
You would think.
But I sent it. Obviously, not only was there not an acknowledgement, there has been no review. But here's the funniest part now. Not actually funny, but here's the most revealing part. Before I had refined the research even further, the editing, I had published a self-published version some years earlier. And whenever I went to events with the self-published version under a different title, whenever I did a reading, I would sell out every copy that I took with me. And some places I would go with 50 copies. There would be people disappointed that I didn't bring enough copies. I'd go with 100 copies, sell out the entire, people would be disappointed that I didn't bring enough copies. So I told this publisher after this version came out from the publisher, I said, host a book event, bring 100 copies, I'll do a reading, and you will see that every copy will be sold out, because I know the audience. And I know after they hear some of the information that the book is always bought. The publisher did not even respond to that proposal, even though I said, any copy that is not sold, I will personally purchase it. Think about that. So what kind of publisher is that? Obviously, it's a publisher that I think was not familiar with the impact that the book was having before they gave me the contract. And I say this because I have no qualms if they revoke the contract. In fact, I would be better off having the contract,
give it back
the
to you.
copyrights back.
Yes.
So that's why I'm willing to say this. They were not familiar with the content and the impact it would have. So now it seems to me that they're not interested in pushing this book, even though it would benefit them financially. So think about that.
It doesn't fit their model of putting down the Black human being.
Correct.
It doesn't. And it's exposing their institutions, their system of intentionally engineering hate towards the Black human being.
Yeah,
Yes,
but
I like that part, intentionally, because I found out, let me give you just one example. I found a letter from a reporter named Lloyd Garrison, now the late Lloyd Garrison. I actually met him in person after I did my research at Columbia, and we developed like a friendship, actually. He's a descendant of the abolitionist, William Lloyd Garrison. So they sent him to Nigeria to cover the Civil War in the 1960s, when the attempted secession of Biafra.
Yeah.
And he wrote a letter that I found in the files in the archives to his editors here in New York, complaining, saying who inserted that scene about Nigerians dressed in grass leaves in his article. In other words, this is something he never saw, he never wrote about, but by the time his article was published in the New York Times, it was there, manufactured out of thin air. So in other words, the editor is sitting here saying, oh, wait, a story about an African setting without describing Africans dressed in grass leaves.
There's no way they're wearing pants.
That's not enough for our readers. So let's create it and put it in that article. And that is lends the reason why I chose the title Manufacturing Hate for this book, because there are many other examples that I found of manufactured incidents and attributed to African settings that never occurred, that somehow ended up in the New York Times articles.
I would like
Adesoji, quickly, just to respond to what Brother Milton is talking about, and in relation to the coverage of our brother Tyre Nichols' fatal beating. If you've noticed, it's been focused on, ooh, they're Black officers. Ooh, they're Black officers, and their pictures are right there. They're Black officers. Ooh, that's the main thing. And that's they're not even talking about the young man lost his life, the family. No, they're Black officers. That's the main thing. And here comes the media again in orchestrating or what do we call it, choreographing the narrative so that it goes the way they want it to go,
which is why I was actually going.
Were you about to ask a question? Because there's something I've been wanting to say. Can I say it, or should I wait for you to ask?
No, I would ask. I was actually going to pose the question.
Bring it up because I'm going to go on.
There is nothing more troubling for the police system in the United States that the history of policing have often had a white face when it comes to the issue of how you describe what policing is looking like. I can guarantee you now, going forward for the next 5 to 10 years, the face of police brutality is that group of
police violence.
That is going to be your new face of police brutality. When you say police brutality, if you Google it now, that's the first image that will come up. So speaking of imagery and the idea of African involvement, Could you speak to the Battle of Adwa and how it was portrayed by the by the media when it happened?
Can I quickly say something before our brother Alimadi responds to that?
Sure.
Well,
So as I was watching the video this morning, there is a white police officer who walks out of his car holding a gun, walking towards Tyre Nichols' car. He is there the whole time this is happening, but he is not among the officers, the pictures that you're seeing on the media, in the media. The other thing too, I will say, as you point out the fact that moving forward, this will be the face of police violence, I am charging Google and anyone else who has that clickbait situation going on, I am charging you today. If you're going to be a company that is standing out there in public and saying Black Lives Matter, make sure that's not the image that comes up when we Google Black violence.
Very good
Brother,
point.
very good point, but
no buts, no
like
ifs.
like
If you're going to be a company going out talking about you care about Black Lives
Oh, no,
Matter,
I agree.
you
We
do
should make that a
diversity,
campaign,
equity, and
actually.
inclusion,
no,
that is your charge today.
yes,
Make
it
sure
is.
that that's not
And
the picture
beyond
that
today.
comes up.
And beyond
Yeah.
today, we should do a
Yes.
campaign over that. That's very important.
Very
Make
Because
sure
important.
that's how
that's not
these
the image
things.
that comes up on Google. Make sure actually it doesn't come up at all. Go ahead, brother. I'm sorry.
No, I like that. I think that's a mission we need to actually pursue and make sure that others, pursue that as well, because that's how it happens, and that's how these
It's ridiculous. We can't
they
keep
become
sitting
the
by as
truth.
they do this like we don't know what's happening. We have to stand up
Right.
against it. We are the only people who can take our liberation. We cannot ask for it.
Very
Our
good.
oppressors will not give it to us.
Of course not. Of course not. And that's one of the misconceptions, when people say, do the right thing. I remind people that often the right thing is not done until you compel people to do the right thing. And so the question is on the imagery and the narrative. And before I also address the question of the depiction of the Battle of Adwa, I also want to make another point with respect to the fact that these 5 officers now, the images are all over the place, And of course, it's because the people that committed this crime were 5 Black officers.
Correct.
Don't forget
If
the
they
white
had
officer
been-
who stands by.
Yeah,
But he was
that
not.
one eventually may be charged too.
No,
But
he
then-
stood by and let it happen. It is
No.
your responsibility as an officer to say
He may
something.
be charged, but
and stop it.
here's the larger
Go
point.
on.
The larger point is, if they had been European officers, their photos, their names, their ID would not have been splashed
Nope.
in the newspaper. So it was easier to throw them under the bus because they're Black officers. But now that has been done, that now should become the standard. Following every
Yes.
major brutal incident such as this murder, regardless of the ethnic background of the officer, they should be terminated. They should be charged with murder, just as in the case of these officers. And
Just
their
like it.
identity should be revealed, and their photos should also be publicized to the media.
They
now
have
that
set a
they've done it,
precedent. Yes.
in this particular instance. So that will be the test going forward. And we have to ensure, because generally, they would not reveal the name of the officer. They would say the officer is on desk duty, unpaid or paid. Normally,
Yes,
that's
it
paid.
is still under investigation.
Exactly. And then we get the story of the officers going to hospital to be checked for trauma, right? After these incidents. That has been the standard narrative when the perpetrators of this crime have been European officers. So now let's make sure that this becomes the norm now, regardless of the ethnicity. Reveal their names, reveal the details of the incident, because remember, even in this particular case, the cover-up had already started. When they went to Tyre's mother, what did they tell her? They said your son was arrested because he was DUI, involved in DUI, and they had to mace him in order to subdue him. So he's in the hospital
something
being
about that,
treated,
yep.
being treated for the macing. So the mother said, let me go and see my son. And said, no, you can't, because he's under arrest. Of course, they did not want her to see him
This is
because he was
ridiculous.
dying. And as she
His
later
face
on
is
said,
swollen.
he had been beaten to a pulp, as she said. How did she end up in the hospital? The hospital called her and said, "Are you so and so?" Said, "Yes, I'm the mother." And said, "Why are you not here? Your son's kidney is failing." And only then did she say, "Oh, but the police told me I couldn't come." Said, "No, you must come if you want to see your son still alive." Think about that. So the cover-up narrative already started. And also in the recording, there's a part where you hear them shouting that he's going for their gun. He's going for their gun.
Mhm.
They're already setting up that false narrative for their defense, just like they tried to do in the Chauvin case.
It is
You
hard
see?
not to get a grip.
That they're trying to establish a narrative. Had that young girl not been there and videotaped the whole thing on her phone, the Chauvin thing might have ended up being very different, and nobody would have been convicted in that case. So I wanted to add that, and in terms of your question of always the twisting the narrative, as I discussed in the book, as you mentioned, the Battle of Adwa, which was, of course, was historic in the sense that Ethiopia was the only African country not to be colonized in the 19th century by European power, because they succeeded in defeating an invading European army from Italy. But after that victory, if you go back and you do the research of how it was depicted in the newspapers in the day, European newspapers, the Ethiopians were depicted as Europeans, you see? So they said, okay, this was not actually a European army losing to African savages. Ethiopians were not really Africans. They were actually also Europeans. And that's why
That's oh God.
they prevailed
You know what?
against other Europeans,
These white oppressors are disgusting. I'm sorry. They really are. The level of insecurity that they have is quite something.
That is why it's key to understand how the media operates. The media does not operate in a vacuum. The media operates in the sense that there is an image that has to be maintained and maintained at all costs.
And economic interest as well.
Very much so. There is a reason why I say it will be a hard hit for that white police officer in that video to be charged. And this is the reason. If you notice, when they surrounded him at the camera, the only people that came into the camera shot, with the exception of the EMT, were white. There were other police cars around, as you can see the lights flashing. But the key guys who beat him mercilessly were constantly, they were within the camera shot. Maybe they didn't know, they were unaware of where the camera was, or because if you notice the parking of the car is also to hide anyone at street level from seeing what is going on. It was only when they, quote unquote, finished with him, that's when that guy moved the car forward. So again, that guy was savvy enough not to get involved.
And all I'm hearing, having taken legal training, is intent. Intent. They are fully aware of their actions.
But he was also conscious not to get involved.
Right. But I think because of the pressure now,
Therefore,
we are definitely going
intent.
to see more arrests, more
definitely.
indictments as a result of that. Because even in this case, the 5 officers nothing was going to happen. It took more than 20 days. Think about that.
Yes.
You see? So the pressure is now helping, and it's going to be very difficult for them to maintain any cover-up. I see one of our followers also has posted something interesting. Laura Sullivan, there's another piece of this situation in the Tyre Nichols case, which is that the recently elected district attorney here, Steve Mulroy, who I know very well, is progressive and acted immediately under pressure. That also makes a difference,
Which brings us to the idea of how do we actually find solutions to matters like this? One is the idea of vetting the people we put in office. And when I say vet, what are their politics? That's key. Because that politics in itself now means we're voting for our very survival.
I agree 100% in terms of the district attorneys in
But
particular.
they have
Very critical.
unfortunately, the system has a way to protect themselves from that. They have something called the Hatch Act. And because of the Hatch Act, you cannot hold anyone accountable based on their political beliefs, because you should not even be looking at anyone as far as employment or
When
being under employment based on political beliefs.
When I say political beliefs, I'm saying when Mr. Mulroy comes forward to say, I want to be your district attorney,
Right.
the first question is, you have the police. Here are some statistics. How do you hope to bridge them? And
Yes.
then listen
In
to
that
him.
way, yes.
Then based on that, you vet him.
Yes.
The
Right.
police chief.
Look at Eric Garner. Remember? No
There you-
indictment in Eric Garner case. When we had the video of the young man being literally lynched with the guy's forearm.
Or in
And
the
then
case,
so, he was resisting arrest, blah, blah, blah. And okay, now I remember something regarding that case too. The first story, and anybody can go back and look at this, the first story that came out in the New York Times about Eric Garner was essentially a press release from the New York Police Department. It talked about the fact that he weighed, I don't know, maybe 280 or almost 300 pounds, and that he had problems breathing during the encounter. They called it an encounter or interaction with the police. And the way it's written, very authentic. They give the corner where the incident happened, the name of the street, the intersection. So you get the impression that this story is being professionally done. The story made no mention of the chokehold. Think about that. In the New York Times,
Manufactured completely.
I wrote an editorial criticizing the New York Times for swallowing that press release from the NYPD. And the story, the editorial I wrote was getting a lot of traffic. Guess what? Weeks later or something, I'm doing some other research. I go back to that story because I want to, read my previous editorial to shape my next editorial. That editorial had been deleted from my website. I have no proof of who did it, but if you look at the people who are being
we have our suspicions.
They might have interest in having that story.
Who would benefit from doing this
from
act?
deleting that. Amazing what we have to deal with.
I mean, which also then points to the Breonna Taylor case. Again, the police go in, falsely obtained warrant. You go in, shoot up the place, and the only charge is for wanton endangerment. Not the people below, not the people above Breonna Taylor, but the people on the other side of Breonna Taylor's flat where one bullet went in.
And the initial charges were actually against the boyfriend.
For shooting at the police.
For fighting back. I mean, you're sleeping, somebody burst into your house. If you do have a weapon, what would you do? Think about that.
I know in the South, some people will get away with that.
And yet he was the one who is initially charged. And any charge that came subsequently was because of public pressure at the highest levels, persistent. And the protests, of course, the demonstrations, the unrelenting, tireless demonstrations, that also really helped. So we take some lessons from all of these. We need to critique and push back against media that demonize our people. We need to teach our people to really actually love themselves.
Yes, indeed.
Repudiate all that, the consequences.
Decolonize your minds.
Decolonize your mind, in fact, which I think is one of the books that you have.
Yes.
Sister.
Yes.
I think there you go.
Yes.
You have the colonialists have made you think that you're inferior, and you look at your brothers and sisters as inferior. You need to stop that.
Right. You need to stop that. And these are titles that we are going to recommend and post at the end of the show. But there's also another title, actually, that may not be widely available. And it is a phenomenal collection of essays. And I'm not saying this just because the late author was also from Uganda, my birth country, but it's actually true. And it's called Africa's Cultural Revolution.
Yes.
By Okot Bitek. So Okot is Okot, and the last name is sometimes spelled Bitek. but the correct spelling is actually P and then apostrophe and then Bitek. And it does a phenomenal job. And of course, it's not by accident that he was also very tight friends with Ngugi wa Thiong'o.
Yep.
They're some of the closest friends. And I think Ngugi writes the introduction to that book, Africa's Cultural Revolution. And in that book, he's saying we need to re-examine the European worshipping that we have in our institutions at every level, whether it's from the church, whether it's the schools, whether it's in the type of government.
Take white Jesus off the wall.
Exactly. Yes. The culture, the books we read. Why do we praise the waltz and ballet? Who can say that the waltz and ballet are better than Makonde carvings or the Ngoma dance of the Africans? You know, he says we need to re-examine all of that at every level. So I strongly recommend that book as well, Africa's Cultural Revolution.
Ngugi also says, I don't understand why in the heat of Kenya, anyone will put on a play. What was that play again? Jane Eyre. And people will go in their coattails. And he said he had to do a double take. He was coming back from the university. And when he saw people walking past, and at first, he thought maybe they were in blackface, but he realized they were actually Kenyans.
Yep.
They were in coattails and top hats.
Yep. And what about the judges?
Don't even get us started on the wigs.
The judges, that's where I was going. The judges wear blonde wigs.
On the wigs.
Come on. You know,
it doesn't even make sense.
On wearing a wig, at the very least, let it be a black wig to match with your natural hair, like the kind of hair I have. If I was compelled to wear those wigs, then I would make it at least, you know, a black wig, right?
Yeah.
They made the blonde wigs because the
Europeans.
Judges in Europe had that type of hair. So, you know.
So you're a black man.
We have our work cut out for us.
Yes.
But we must continue doing it, you know.
So you're a black man or woman in the legal system in Africa operating. I'm now picturing that the imagery, operating under the blonde whiteness. So you are literally putting white supremacy on your head.
Exactly.
Literally putting white supremacy on your head and saying, this is governing how I do law.
The underlying reason for the wearing of the wigs is actually much more interesting than that. It depicts wisdom.
Hold on.
So
you're making our lives even much more difficult.
Hold on, please. Hold on, brother. Hold on.
We had already absorbed enough pain.
We had let it go.
He's elevating it by saying it goes even beyond.
So it depicts European wisdom, because at the time the idea of judges sitting over cases was that whoever has those wigs on is supposed to be wise in the ways of that guild.
Right.
Because what they usually sat on was cases involving guilds. So you then come in, literally, you come into there, you see them wearing the wig already. So you go in, and if you notice, what do they say when they approach the bench? My Lord.
Lord have mercy, Africans.
Well
we have a lot of decolonizing of our minds to do. I will say a prayer for us all tonight. Go on.
No shade to the lawyers, but you guys need to read some more. But
brother,
going on the wig, we have somebody we out user says, right, I don't get the wigs part. If you rename your country after independence, but you keep the wigs, you know, it is mind-boggling, you know.
It truly is. I was going to ask Brother Adesoji, I don't know where you're going with this next, but I wanted to also go, I have a quote I wanted to mention here just to show how dire this issue is. I mean, we all know. And in these moments where we are reminded by the incidents happening and the atrocities happening, we remember it. But months go and we forget, and we're acting like everything is normal, and it happens again next year. And it happens again the following year. But just to show how much this is happening in the US. And also I wanted us to go and talk about Chief Davis. and connect it to this, because there's a reason why it keeps happening. And I'm charging the system now. I'm charging those who are put in charge. I am putting the blame on them for allowing this to continue happening. I am putting the blame on Chief Davis for allowing these men to be out there knowing their character. And I'll come back to that. But Dr. DeGroy, in her book Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, says, and this is in New Jersey, in 1999, an investigation in New Jersey revealed that black drivers, we're talking about just driving,
Right.
on the New Jersey Turnpike were 5 times more likely
Yep.
than white drivers to be stopped by New Jersey State Police.
Yep.
Yep.
5 times more likely.
Yeah.
And when I think about the video that I was watching of Tyre Nichols, in my head I'm asking myself, I'm thinking 14th Amendment. Why did you stop this young man? Why are there 5 plus police cars on one man who is unarmed? Why the excessive policing? Why?
Yeah.
Are you all bored? Do you have nothing to do? If you don't have anything to do, I honestly have projects in the community that you can do.
No, I mean, you lay very salient point, and even in that interaction, there are 3 things that were happening simultaneously. One, they were pulling at him, they were shouting at him, they were also giving him instructions at the same time.
And he said, I hear you, I am down. He gave in. But
He
they
said-
still
Yeah.
were
But
barking.
those, I'm just interjecting for a second here. Those yelling were not really directed at him.
No.
It was not for him.
It was
for
theater.
the recording, which they would later then use
as
in their
justification.
defense,
It was
that he was
theater.
resisting, and that's why they kept shouting. In fact, I forget which incident in another location where the officers were shouting preposterous commands that had already been complied with, you see, but they did not realize, they actually thought their cameras were off and it recorded it to show how preposterous they were. The so-called suspect had complied, had done everything that had been told, and they were still saying, do this, and at one point even said, he's reaching for my gun, when the person's hands had already been handcuffed, and they ended up killing that individual.
Brother
So that's part of
Alimadi.
the reason why they always yell those instructions. It has no correlation with what's being done. They're just establishing their defense. And also, sister, you brought up the book, The Post-Traumatic Slavery Syndrome. Let's also not forget this very important fact, that most police departments in the United States evolved from slave patrols.
Slave catchers. Yeah.
Patrols that used to go out to search for enslaved Africans who had managed to escape. And that type of enforcement is what then developed into the modern police forces that we see.
And so you also then
fine.
see the interaction, which is when you ask questions, it's not questions, but it's actually orders.
You're
Where are
barking.
you going?
Mhm.
Remove boy. Where are you coming from? Remove boy. Where are you? Who are you speaking to like that? Boy. So that is all from the slavery era. You know, this idea that we have impunity over your body.
Mhm.
You have no say in what happens to you here on in. You know, once you cross that crucible of interaction with the police, you effectively their property.
Exactly. And that is the charge they've been given, to protect property. And you are not human anymore. You are not human
you
anymore.
were once property as well.
Yes, you were. You were. That's exactly where I'm going with that. To them, in their minds, they're still operating under that mindset. And I was going to say, in response to Brother Alimadi's point, where this is the way that they are speaking when they pull over, especially Black men and Black women. There has to be somewhere in a room or in an office where they get together and agree this is how we'll operate. Right?
No, I agree
This
with
is
you
not, if
100%.
there if it is happening constantly with different individuals, there must be somewhere where the
Okay.
uniformity
All right,
is
sister,
being
you actually have
manufactured,
introduced something very critical, and
which
I'll tell
is
you why.
which is going to lead back to Chief Davis. But go on, Brother Ali
I'll tell
Madi.
you why. The conversation is there, definitely.
Yes.
Because if you study police incidents, abuse, of murder, of African men and women in this country, you'll find a consistent pattern in the narrative that follows. Resisting arrest, tried to go for my weapon, pulled out a knife. You can literally just close your eyes and pick any police department and see the press release that came out after a particular incident. I remember I wrote a couple of editorials about this, and subsequently some of the corporate media did follow-up editorials and did their investigative studies as if they'd come up with it originally. But it's fine. I don't mind if, in our small way, we can contribute to
the
forcing them
conversation. Yeah.
to do the right thing. But here's the other point I wanted to make. And this is still there. So I'm actually revealing some information that could be useful. Many years ago, the New York Times sent me and another reporter to go to the New York Police Department and go through the files and select incident reports involving young Black men within a certain age range. I think it was between the age of 14 to 16. I don't remember precisely. Because when you are involved in any incident that the police become involved in, there's an incident report generated with your name, your age, your address, whether you're employed or not, and then describing the incident in which you were involved. So they wanted us to, so the police obviously do not allow you to make copies, but they allow you to take notes. So we are able to write down the names of these young men, their age, all the details, and the kind of incident they were involved in. The New York Times was looking to see if there was a pattern of, I don't know, behavioral or whatever, or I don't know what they were looking for, but they were looking for a pattern in all these incident reports we were going to compile, and then to do a story, and they ended up doing some story. But here's the most interesting thing that I wanted to bring out at the same time. And I'm talking about this publicly for the first time on Kumbukeni. We were sent there to copy down these incidents, right? But within those same files that we were allowed to access by the New York Police Department, there were incident reports involving police officers. And what was the pattern? The pattern was that every other night, police officers would be taken to some hospital because they were either intoxicated or they had been consuming drugs. So their name would be there and the incident that they were involved in as well. So me being a reporter who looks for all the information, even though I was sent for a
truth
particular
teller,
assignment, I also started writing that down.
You got nosy.
And I went,
fact collector.
and I said to the New York Times, you sent us to look for this. Here it is, the young 16-year-old. But here's also another set of information. The name of the officer, which hospital they went to, boom, boom, boom. You know what? They did the story of the young Black males.
Of course.
They never touched the fact that many of these police officers
Still 7.
intoxicated or consumed drugs. Those files are still in the New York Police Department. So anybody who has the power authority to go and look into those files, you will find that information that I'm telling you right now. Because if that was the kind of pattern that I looked at many years ago when I looked into those files, since there's been no major intervention to stop it from happening, I'm confident that there are many officers who are still consuming drugs, and consuming alcohol intoxicated while on the job, and that there are more recent files with similar information. There you have it.
And therefore, that goes to behavior. If you're intoxicated, you're not in the
Absolutely.
right mind to control your actions. I'm not saying now we're making them innocent. No. Those officers who were involved in Tyre Nichols' fatal beating need.
Exactly. And that's the point I was getting to, because whenever there's an incident like that, the first thing they look for is whether that individual had a criminal history, whether that individual had a history of drugs or what have you. They need to do the same thing
to the officers.
Every police officer involved in an incident like that. But on the but they have the opposite. In the NYPD, for example, they could invoke the law that allowed them not to speak about the incident for 48 hours. In other words, you have 48 hours to get sober and to concoct your narrative, and then you can speak to an investigator. What kind of nonsense is that? What is the use of an investigation if the suspect is given 48 hours? Do you think a young black man or woman who is a suspect in a crime is going to say, oh, no, give me 48 hours and then I'll talk to the cops? Of course not. You are laid in handcuffs immediately. But police officers are allowed to invoke that law and say, I'll talk to you. Just give me 2 days.
Brother Limadi, and Adisoji, quickly, I believe it's important that we touch on this and I'm going to highlight Laura Sullivan's comment because it goes towards what I'm about to say. I wouldn't want us to end this session without speaking of Chief Davis and the fact that the system is allowing these officers out there to do this. They are the ones allowing for this to continue on and on and on. The unit these police officers apparently were under is called Scorpion Unit. And since the incident, apparently the unit has been disbanded. It no longer exists. But as you can see, as Laura Sullivan has pointed out, the special unit is more of a counter-terrorism kind of operation, which stands for Street Crimes Operations to Restore Peace in Our Neighborhoods. So Chief Davis says that apparently this incident is, what did she call it? Something dishonor. No. It was something dishonor.
It's a dishonor to the police force.
Yes, she said it was a dishonor to the police force. The words, those are not the exact words. But my question is, Chief, you're in that precinct and you see these officers because they're loud and proud and they do not hide who they are. And I'm certain this is not their first incident. I'm certain this is not their first violation.
It is funny that you should mention this is not their first incident. There was a gentleman, I think I saw him somewhere on YouTube. He was being interviewed from one of these main channels where he says this very same squad, he was going into the supermarket and they accosted him. They said, oh, you fit the description of somebody who has just shoplifted. And he said, what are you talking about? And then they said, oh, we're just joking with you.
Exactly. And this is the behavior I'm talking about.
This same squad.
Yes. These are men. These are men who to them, this is a joke. This is fun. This is a night out having a good time. This is the mentality I'm trying to expose that these men have. To them, it is a joke. They're just kidding when they humiliate you as a black man. When they come there with their full chest and stand in their authority to step down on you, to kneel down on you, to hold you down. It is passing time for them. It is fun. It is a sport. It is a sport for them. And so this behavior is happening in the office when they're in the police station. This behavior has to be displayed at some point. And Chief Davis, with all due respect, when you come and say you are horrified by what happened, you have been letting it happen. You have seen these men speak the way they speak. You've heard of incidents. This supermarket incident, I am certain they come back to the office and joke about what they did. And you never stopped it. So forget forgive me, Chief Davis, if we are not going to sit here and feel sorry for you or take your words. We're holding you accountable as well, and every other chief in the United States. It's about you. It's about time you all start controlling your officers and stop them from killing Black people on the streets. We've had enough.
Here's what I would add to what Sister just said. And this is actually one of an editorial I wrote in the past. They should do a review of every police officer, whether it's an annual review, whether it's every 6 months, whether it's every 2 years, and look into their files. Now, the key thing is you need to publicize this because they do look into their files and they know what is out there. But we need to publicize what is in their files because this particular job is a life and death situation, particularly for people in our marginalized communities. So if the politicians want to have any constructive function in terms of police reform, that has one of the things that should be the outcome.
Here's another.
Publicize what is in their file so we know who should be on the police force and who should not be on the police force.
Exactly. If indeed you are officers to serve us, the community, we as the community are requesting right now, we are demanding that every quarter you put out information of the officers who are serving us.
Yes.
And their records, as far as what they've done to maintain that position. So if they have violations, we want to know why they have them and we want to see them.
Instead, they go to great lengths to protect these violations.
Yes.
The officer who killed Eric Garner, he had been written up on numerous occasions for abusing, particularly young Black men. There was one incident where he supposedly ordered a Black man to get out of his automobile and to strip naked in the middle of the street. And yet he continued to be a police officer. Even after killing Eric Garner, he continued to be a police officer for several years and even got pay raises until he was ultimately fired without ever being indicted, by the way, or charged or tried.
As I think of solutions, as you continue to talk, Brother Limadi, because this is what we're talking about, solutions. What can we as people do, as the citizens? We as the Black community, what can we do? This is another one that's just popping in my head because as I was watching the video, I saw someone drive by. And I know that feeling where you drive by and you see police talking to a Black man, a young man, and you want to say something, but you're scared because you don't want it to happen to you. This is what I'm saying right now, people, my community, my Black community, from now on, how we need to start operating. You drive by, you see it, start calling your friends who are in the neighborhood to all come there and confront the incident so that you're no longer doing it by yourself. Reach out to everyone you know in the neighborhood. Come over here, something is happening. We have to do something as the community.
I agree with that. And thankfully for the smartphone and these videos and cameras that we have, those have made significant difference. Life and death differences. Yeah. In the Eric Garner case, in many other cases, you know.
Yeah, let's do something about this. Let's definitely do something about this, Brother Adesoji.
Yes. I would like us to leave with the words from fellow Nubian Brother Garrick Faria's book titled, quite coincidentally, American Terrorism, which says the street heat has to transition now.
Yes.
The protests has now to transition to political organization.
Yes.
Ensure that you have a say in who becomes your mayor, who becomes your police chief, who becomes your district attorney. It is important and imperative that happens. Otherwise, we will continue this cycle of protest, dissipate, protest again, and dissipate. And
if they fail, they should lose their jobs. Chief Davis should no longer be in charge of that precinct. She failed. She failed. She let men who are harmful, who have bad behavior, who have record of bad behavior, stay on the precinct. So she has failed.
And on that very, I won't want us to leave on a very sad note, but how can you put a spin on such tragedy other than to say that we should continue to look out for each other?
Yes.
We are them. When I say them, the person you're looking at that looks like you, you're him and you're her. So treat them or view them as you want them, as they want them to view you. On that very communal note, I would ask Sister Nduku, any last words?
For me, black man, black woman, love yourself. And in loving yourself, love your brothers and your sisters.
Right.
And in loving your brothers and your sisters, protect your brothers and your sisters. Do something. Stop being okay with the status quo. Enough is enough. You have to stand up for your community. Globally, stop with the divisions. We have to be united against this oppressive system that keeps killing our people. Brother Milton.
Brother Milton?
Yeah, she took the words out of my mouth. I'm personally intoxicated on self-love.
Me too.
And Black love. And it's a remarkable, very empowering feeling that people underestimate the power of it. Know your history. Know that all human origins are traced to East and Central Africa. That all of us originated at least 200,000 years ago in East and Central Africa. All of us traced to African origins, whether you call yourself a European. So this is very empowering knowledge. You cannot be lesser than anyone in the world if your origins are African. So once you know that, it should affect your feeling toward yourself and your feeling toward others as well. Obviously, these 5 so-called police officers don't have that knowledge or self.
They did not get the memo.
And it was not manifested at all there. But before we depart, sister, you should also remind people how they can support.
Yes, and before I even remind people how they can support us, I want to say, Black people, that when they tell you you're inferior, think about the food you cook. Think about the music you play. Think about the outfits. Think about the colors. Think about the joy in your community and tell me what is inferior about that. So we are we're always happy to be in community with you all. It's unfortunate that today the subject is not uplifting, but today the good thing we're taking out of this is we as a community are coming to support our brother. We as a community are coming together to honor our brother. That's the positive here. We are honoring him. We're not letting his death be in vain. We are recognizing him as a human being, as one of us. And so we ask you all, so that we can continue doing this work, to please support Kumbukeni by either joining our Patreon community at patreon.com/Kumbukeni or subscribe. We're looking to hit that 1 million subscribers so that the 3 of us can start dedicating more time to doing the research and bringing these stories to you. Subscribe at youtube.com/@Kumbukeni1. And we thank you all for joining us in conversation.
Share the link with your friends, families, and let's take the message forward. Thank you very much, everyone. And until next week, it is
Kwaherini.
It is Odaro.